Gentlemen, welcome to the show. This week I'm sitting down with Dr. Larry Plummer and Blake Schwank. I appreciate you guys being here. You guys look great. I'm excited to talk about entrepreneurship, business, and everything in between. So how you guys doing today?
Yeah, we're doing great.
I'm doing fantastic.
Great. We clean up well, apparently.
Apparently. There's a lot of shiny heads in this room today, but
we're
going to adjust the lighting.
Yeah, my hair is much nicer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to talk about, like I said, entrepreneurship, business ownership. And I do just want to start, Larry, with you. Just kind of give us a little bit of background, kind of how you got into this space and then what you do now and kind of everything in between.
Yeah. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship at UCCS, so I have many titles. I hold something called the Plummer Chair in Business and Entrepreneurship. So in that role, I'm the director of the Plummer Institute for Innovation and Commercialization. It's just easier to remember it as EPIC with two I's. Misspell it with two I's and you're good.
I like that.
We're a university institute that provides assistance across the university and in the community to entrepreneurs. We're trying to build the entrepreneurial community. We have programs that are trying to recruit entrepreneurs to move to the Springs. We have grant programs. We have on-campus programs like The Garage. Probably our most successful graduate of The Garage is Rafael De La Vega, who started Salt Athletic, the gym bags. You'll see them advertised at the Switchbacks game. We're always seeing them advertised. Started in The Garage, then moved through our accelerator, won a Torch grant, and he's got now a company that's growing quite well and doing well. But the reason I'm here is the most recent program we brought to the Springs is the Entrepreneurship Boot Camp for Veterans, EBV, which we are doing in partnership with Syracuse University's Institute for Veterans and Military Families. Lots of, just like the military, there's lots of acronyms
everywhere
and a lot of titles. But I'm also an associate professor of entrepreneurship. I teach both undergraduate and MBA students. And I've been doing that for, actually the first night I was supposed to teach as an instructor of record was 9/11, literally the night of 9/11.
Really?
Needless to say, class wasn't held, but that tells you how long I've been a university educator.
Yeah, quite some time. And I just want to touch on it a little bit. Before all that, you had a little bit of a history in some film.
Yeah. So my undergraduate degree was in television, radio, and film production.
That's awesome.
So for those of you watching from home, it was the days of 3/4-inch tape. The tapes were about this big. So all this tech you're very lucky that it doesn't weigh much.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make documentary films. That was my dream. I moved to Washington, D.C., freelanced for a bunch of years, worked for all the major networks. I did shoots one of the freelance shoots I did was Parker Posey. She's a big independent actress. Parker Posey, her first film for HBO. I told you already that I played a dead body on Unsolved Mysteries, which was my parents were a little shocked that was my claim to fame after spending so much money sending me to university.
It's an honor to be in your presence.
Yes, I know. I know. So, my interest in working with veterans just comes from a huge military history buff. I was a tour guide at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. Most of the other people that volunteered at the museum were much older than me. In those days, I was the youngest tour guide on the volunteer squad, but they were all retired military, 2 stars, and first woman certified for jet training in the Air Force was actually one of the tour guides at the museum, stuff like that. So I come by my interest in being around vets and military history, honestly.
Yeah, well, we appreciate your academic service here.
So I'm not a vet. I am a son of a vet, though, I should say. My father served in the Air Force Military Air Transport Service. So he flew DC-6s, the C-118.
Man, that's
C-118, DC-6B.
Yeah.
So he did that in the 50s. So my father was a Korean vet, received his commission two weeks before the official end of hostilities. So
probably some discipline instilled in you that made you a successful entrepreneur.
I don't know about that. Sorry to throw that under the bus.
Good.
But my interest in entrepreneurship, so I don't know where my interest in entrepreneurship actually comes from, but my family creates academics. So there is the argument to be made that still the number one predictor of you being an entrepreneur is you grew up in a household with entrepreneurial parents.
Sure.
But that's also true for us academics. So my sister and I both have PhDs. My sister just retired as Associate Vice Provost of Virginia Tech University and so on. But my interest in entrepreneurship has always been driven by my interest in a lot of the aviators that I was talking about on my tours in the Air and Space Museum. It was things like Jack Northrop and Lockheed and the folks that founded Cessna, well, I think his first name was Henry, but Cessna, the Orteig Prize, which is the $25,000 prize that Lindbergh won when he flew across the Atlantic. So everything that I was talking about at the museum was always based around sort of an entrepreneurial background of people having a vision of, I have a better way I could do this. And I've always found that really interesting.
Yeah.
I have started my own companies, but I've always described my job is to know all the different styles by which people play their game. So I usually often will use a poker as an analogy, which is ironic because I'm a terrible poker player. But
things good poker players say.
It's who gets to bluff. Yeah. How do you play your strategy? Everyone has a different style and a different approach. So my job's not so much to play the game, but to know and recognize the different styles.
Right.
As I say, I have started a couple of companies with my wife. We've done very well. We've invested in some companies. We've done very well. But for the most part, I've never seen myself as an entrepreneur, but I like working and being around entrepreneurs and training the next generation of entrepreneurs is what I do.
Oh, absolutely. Inspirational story for sure. Let's get Blake introduced here. You're kind of the lived experience of an entrepreneur. Just tell us your early days of business and then where you're at today, because it's a very inspirational story.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So Larry's talking about being a family of academics. I kind of broke that mold. So my grandfather was a PhD, taught at University of Montana, and Dad got his and taught at the Air Force Academy. And so I got my bachelor's degree, coveted geography degree, and but had the military background. So my other grandfather was in the Pacific back in World War II. Then my dad was in Vietnam and, an academy grad. And then, and so I went in the military, got out from that, and, in 99, started up with a company doing IT stuff as their IT director, and then the dot-com bust took us out. So, I was not an intentional entrepreneur, just sort of ended up unemployed, and what do you do? And, at that point, people were not hiring people in technology because the whole economy had just fallen apart due to the dot-com bust. So, May of 2001, my wife and I started Colorado Computer Support and just decided to hang out our shingle and do tech work and take whatever work that we can get. And thankfully, she had the business background. Otherwise, I would have just gone out, taken cash, fixed some computers, and we would have gone out of business like most companies do. But she was able to set us up properly with the state, do the taxes, do all the back end stuff that keeps the machine running. And I could go out and do the tech work, go meet people, and go, make the money.
Yeah.
And that worked out well for, the first few years, but there was nothing really to help us try to figure out how to run the business. There was some stuff with the city, but there was really no support that I saw. There might have been, but I didn't see it. There was a support of veterans getting out. The military society now does a whole lot better job than when I went through transition in 1999 to help veterans go to their next life, whatever that is, employment, be an entrepreneur, or whatever. So thankfully, a few years in, we found a business coach, but that's not cheap,
right.
And so that costs a lot of money. Little did I know that, fast forward, and there's actually programs that are just about as good, if not better, than what the business coaches are out there doing, with a whole lot more resources. And I met Larry through, I went to a conference called VETS. It's put on by the National Veteran Small Business Coalition. And there I applied for a cohort. I can't think of the name of it. It's the one put on by JP Morgan.
Yeah, the EBV Accelerate program. I think it's for companies like yours further down that are they're not in the startup phase, but they're in the growth maturity phase.
How do you scale?
Dealing with the scaling, dealing with what comes next as a growth company. And it was from Florida State, wasn't it?
Yeah, Florida State. But actually there was one that it's like the CEO Circle or something, but it was where you flew in quarterly somewhere. And I didn't get selected for that, but they said your business is more along the lines of this 3-day course in Tallahassee. And so went out to that. It was a great experience just meeting with other entrepreneurs because, being an entrepreneur is very lonely. Being the owner of a business, no one you can share this stuff with. And so that was a great experience. And met with the director out there, and he said, "You got to go back and meet this, Larry Plummer guy. You'll like him." So came back here, hunted Larry down about a year ago, and quickly became friends. And then got involved in the program that they do here. And this is way more intensive than the one that I went through. Mine was 3 12-hour days. Here they're doing 7 or 8 10-hour days. And
we don't call it a boot camp for nothing.
Right.
This one is great though for starting out, which is what it was. There were people that had basic business ideas. The one I was at, people had been in business for years and are just looking to take it to the next level. And so it was really cool to see the cohort that showed up for Larry's, because you don't know what you're getting into when you go start a business. You've got this idea, and it was really inspiring to see the different students that showed up.
That's quite the journey for sure. So now, I mean, you kind of highlighted a little bit, but the most successful IT business in Colorado, I would say, very large scale business. So
I'll take that. But
yeah,
it's interesting because when you start talking about IT businesses in Colorado, you end up with, where does that end up with companies, like, BlueStack or some of the other ones that are large scale defense,
right,
cyber kind of businesses. That's not, we're not, not everything in Colorado Springs is space and defense and everything else. There are, one of the things we've worked with, like Sean Murray few months ago, is there's a lot more critical infrastructure and a lot more things that are critical to the welfare of the United States and our day-to-day operation than the warfighter, and so you've got 16 other critical infrastructures. It's healthcare, it's, public utilities and all this other stuff, manufacturing, that keeps the lights on in the country. And in Colorado Springs, sometimes we forget about that because everything is so defense focused.
Well, let me get a couple questions in here. This is going to be some great conversation because we have the academic base, the real life base. Not saying you haven't lived it in real life, but you're teaching now. So I really want to get answers from both of you and kind of hear both perspectives, because I just really enjoy asking questions, hearing perspectives, and then I learn, listeners learn, and I think that's the probably most proficient way to learn is through other people's lived experience and perspectives, and that's kind of what the podcast scene has kind of become. So let's start with the definition of entrepreneurship, but reframing it. What's the difference between an entrepreneur and a business owner, and when does the former become the latter?
That is a great question. And if you wonder what we academics are talking about at our annual conferences, your worst nightmare, like 9,000 business professors in one place, this is exactly the questions we want to ask.
Yeah.
So entrepreneurship is a process. So let me give you the classic. If any of my academic friends are they could rattle this off themselves because it comes from a 2000 paper published in 2000 that put entrepreneurship on the map as an academic discipline.
Okay.
Entrepreneurship is the process by which opportunities to produce future goods and services are discovered, evaluated, and unfortunately the scholars use the word exploit. So it was discovered, evaluated, and exploit opportunities. You'll notice a couple things. An entrepreneurship is not a who. There's no entrepreneurship gene. Entrepreneurship can be taught. When I see the comments on, in the comment section about entrepreneurship can't be taught, that's wrong. I have a 20-year background plus of teaching people to be entrepreneurs. But entrepreneurship is not a who. It's not asking who is the entrepreneur is the wrong question. That's the title of another famous paper in my field. And what we've learned is that actually the only thing that entrepreneurs have in common is that they act entrepreneurially. They are starting their own businesses. Now, to your point, business ownership is not inherently the same thing as entrepreneurship. We think of the entrepreneurial process as amassing the resources you need to get the business going. So one of the things that you have to wrestle with is that there's the tendency to want to use entrepreneurship and innovation as synonyms, or to use entrepreneurship and small business as synonyms, or entrepreneurship and a lifestyle business or something else, or investing as synonyms. they're related. They're very close cousins, but they're not exactly the same thing.
Right.
So once a company's, so say a small business is very much a legitimate outcome of the entrepreneurial process, but a small business is not the same thing. Like we're not running a small business program at UCCS, but we are encouraging, if that's what your goal is, you want to start a food truck, you want to start a restaurant, you want to start a dive shop or skateboard shop, absolutely. But if you also want to start a high growth biotech company, you can do that too.
So just so I understand, an entrepreneur might gain investment funding to then start a small business, which would then create innovations within a sector.
Yeah. Okay. And so it's very easy for people to sort of blur, the definitions. But I'm an academic. So in my world, being very precise in our meanings is critical. That's how we understand each other.
Yeah.
And from the outside of the academic world, it sounds like we're wasting our time, but we're trying to be extremely precise about what we mean. So there was a point, for example, where a company like Blake's was created out of the entrepreneurial process, and he has to revisit that process from time to time to figure out what's the next opportunity, because it's all about him as an entrepreneur recognizing an opportunity to take his company new direction, new customers, new markets, new services. When he's engaged in that aspect of his business, he's acting as the entrepreneur. There are other times when he's raising money or he's just managing the company. There's times you must be feeling like I'm not actually running the business is running me.
Right.
In terms of putting out fires and hiring the people and some of the headaches or the challenges and even the positives of having a workforce that you are now responsible for. So entrepreneurship is an act. It's a process, which is good because it means that anyone can be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I sound like the chef from Ratatouille. Anyone can cook.
Right.
And those of us who are serious about entrepreneurship education believe that the process can be taught to anybody as long as they're focused.
You teach and educate aspiring entrepreneurs, but like in Blake's situation, you have entrepreneurs through adversity. So tell me your experience about becoming an entrepreneur, kind of like trial by fire.
Yeah, it was trial by fire. And I think one of the things, though, that Larry says, anybody can be an entrepreneur, but you have to have a little bit of training along the way, right? So because you can't just go the school of hard knocks, because I've had friends that have gone out to be an entrepreneur, started a business, and didn't realize that they had to pay Uncle Sam, right? Because when you're getting a W-2, you have no idea how much Uncle Sam's taken out of your paycheck, right? It just comes out. And then you go start your business and you don't realize that could be 20, 25, 30% of your paycheck needs to go to the IRS. And then a year or two in, all of a sudden you owe this big bill and then you go bankrupt and everything else. Or starting
that's a classic story, by the way.
I'm sure.
Or starting, but if nobody teaches you that,
right,
and then you don't know. Or finding a business that's actually profitable. People come up with great ideas, but they go into an industry that's really hard to start making a profit on any time in the near future, let alone ever. And you see a lot of times people go try to start. You mentioned lifestyle businesses. Lifestyle businesses are fine, but they're not going to necessarily fund your retirement. And if you're not careful, you're going to spend more money than what you're bringing in, or you're going to make no money. And about 5 years in, we were basically making enough to have a lifestyle with CCS. And, I don't know, it was about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning while I'm trying to do the books, and my wife, comes in. We have 2 kids and a mortgage and all this other stuff, and nicely says, why don't you get a job, honey? Okay, it wasn't that nice. But really comes down to it is at some point, if you're not doing it the right way, having a normal job is a better option. So
this experience is extremely common in terms of people setting off to be the entrepreneur. They have a very romantic vision.
Sure.
And I've often used, because I've now been teaching veterans now since 2008. I hear exactly. It's the analogous story of people falling in love with the military because of the ribbons and the parades, and you don't see the blood, sweat, and tears that goes behind the scenes. If you're not into that part of military service, is not for you. Exactly the same. Being an entrepreneur could be the most unromantic thing you could choose to do as a career. It's incredibly long hours. It's incredibly hard work. It is failures after failure after failure. Sometimes, some days you're the bug and some days you're the windshield. And on some days you're both. Like you can have the highest of highs and the lowest of lows on the same day as an entrepreneur. And this is one of the things we have to spend time on, is making sure you have found that opportunity that speaks to you as a human. I need to see this business grow and thrive. And this is exactly where one of the strengths of military service is that discipline. And if we've talked about this before, the fact that you've been through boot camp and have been pushed beyond what you thought you were capable of doing. So most veterans will tell me, like, by comparison, being an entrepreneur is actually not as hard as some of the things I've done in my prior career.
Right. Maybe physically.
Well,
yeah.
But physical, how much of that physical is mental? I mean, I pretended to be an athlete once upon, and I was run into the ground by coaches, in full football gear and all that stuff, but not to the extent that you've ever been pushed. I guarantee you have never reached the level of effort that you've put in your career. But that mindset of suddenly entrepreneurship doesn't look so daunting, I think becomes one of the strengths that veterans bring to the entrepreneurship table. Is you've heard me say this 100 times to you. Your definition of a bad day is very different from mine.
Yeah. And, sometimes said, well, nobody's shooting at you, but, thankfully most veterans don't have that experience, but still it's not boot camp. Nobody's standing in your face screaming at you most of the time.
Right. Most of the time.
Your temperature tolerance is somewhere between 30 degrees and 110 degrees.
Yeah.
You've been in the desert in MOP 4. You've done all this stuff that has really sucked.
Yeah.
And you've probably deployed somewhere, NTC or the Middle East or Korea, where you really have, you work really long, hard days. And so you're that's what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And so, you just continue to show up. And that's a big part of what it takes to be an entrepreneur, is not giving up.
Yeah.
That's true.
With your psychology degree, the other thing is, when you're in the military, I think one of the things that EBV does, or VBOC or Mount Carmel or whoever is getting veterans together, getting together with your peers, because as an entrepreneur, if you go from, your unit out to do your own thing, you're all of a sudden in charge and you're on top and you're lonely and you don't have someone to go share with, right? You don't have someone to talk to. What does it, and through the years, I've had a lot of, trail friends where you're just out there dumping stuff, but you've got to find somebody, whether it's through EBV, whether it's through some other, Mount Carmel, is who do you talk to about having to terminate employees, or profit, or not making profit, or how much do you pay people? I mean, there's so much, or just the stressors of losing clients, losing employees. And so it is while you know how to muscle your way through it and show up, there are days that are absolutely, and seasons that are absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, we started before 9/11 and went through that. We had the 2008 crash. We had COVID. We've had a few other things where,
those of us of a certain generation have been through a couple of rounds of this stuff.
Yeah.
And you work through it, but you've got to figure out some healthy way to deal with it.
Yeah. I want to extract something you just said and highlight it. You said, as an entrepreneur, you don't have someone yelling in your face.
Oh, you do.
There's
sometimes.
Well, there's more to that, because maybe as a veteran, you're used to that, but just anyone, you don't have that leadership. Like, you might be your own boss. You might be the one who needs to look in the mirror and yell in your own face. So how does that play a role, not having someone there yelling at you like in boot camp?
Oh, that's interesting, because I was going to say that the one that's yelling at you in that, so the drill instructor that's in your nose is actually the market. It's with all the data from that's yelling at you, your ideas. And I would say that maybe you went through this too, is that there's no shortage of people who want to just crap all over your business idea. I'm gonna leave my job and I'm going to want to start this company. And there's no shortage of people who are going to tell you that's the worst thing you could do.
Right.
Right. And so is it somebody yelling at you? But the reason I was kind of chuckling to myself as you were saying that is I often will I try to sort of embody with my students the market where they'll come to me and say, hey, Larry, I've got this idea. Would you read my marketing strategy? And I'm sitting there going like, you got to rewrite this. Like, this is pretty bad, and I try not to be really gentle about it because if I don't tell them, the world's going to tell them, and the world's going to tell them when they've invested, it's better than to hear it from a professor now saying like, you don't have a market here. Your market analysis is flawed. It's incomplete. I don't see a vision for how you're going to even get these people to come give you money. So it depends on how you extend the analogy of being yelled at.
Yeah. I like that. That's a good segue. Let's talk about failure real quick. I want to understand your guys' perspective on failure, and at what point is a failure or a loss a complete waste of time, and at what point is it a learning lesson that helps you progress? So how has failure been a part of your guys' journey?
Thankfully, we've not failed with the entire company, but we have had clients that you bend over backwards trying to keep happy, and then they leave you, and it's tough. So at least in the military, right? You don't have a client that leaves you. You don't have something else. I mean, you might, at some point you have to leave the military. But
right.
I think one of the things that is really tough is when you pour your heart and soul into certain clients, certain partners, and then the relationship doesn't work out. And in trying to realize why the relationship doesn't work out, is healthy to sit down with, coworkers, business partners, and go, what happened? Because it is initially you go, what did I do? What could I have done? What could I have done different? And, most of the time there's nothing. Somebody made a decision, that you don't agree with, but it has nothing to do with you personally, but it's too easy to take and personally, take it personal, and then, go eat too much food, or I don't know, go drink too much, or go do whatever.
Yeah.
And, but it's really personal. So we've had that. We also started up a different arm of the business, and, in the cannabis industry, actually. So
really?
We stood up a whole separate business, and we had that going for 7-8 years and went way too long with it because we weren't watching. We kept holding on with hope. And just the industry is too chaotic.
Yeah.
And anybody that spent money on it has pretty much lost money. Everybody that's running, most of them are just doing lifestyle businesses.
Yeah.
So,
Larry, what's your insights on failure?
I would say that failure is at the core of what we teach. I've even had some of my funnier students, sort of my more cynical students say, that entrepreneurship is a fetish of failure. And it kind of is.
I see
because we would not use the word failure, but we're going to use the word pivot a lot. And this is where Blake and I are going to make a list of all the military cliches that absolutely are true in business too. And one of them is no plan survives contact with the enemy. That I always tell my students, you're going to write a business plan. Always write a business plan. It's a document. But whatever you put in the business plan is what's not going to happen. I don't care what it is.
Yeah.
But it's the planning process. And it's digging, and so we're now wrestling with AI. Never use AI to write your business plan. Do your own writing, do your own analysis, read your own reports. The goal is not to create a document, it's to go through the planning process, because as soon as you open for business, as soon as you set your prices, as soon as you start marketing, as soon as you hire your first salespeople, whatever you thought was going to happen, it's not going to happen, right? And what that is those are a series of little failures. I thought the market was this, it turns out it's that. That's a failure, right? So how you adapt and react, and it's the wallowing in the data and all the different options you had in the planning phase, that's what makes for good improvisation. And I've heard, the more I share this with folks who've served in the infantry or commanded, they're like, that's exactly right. I have to go, you've been assigned, go across the street, I need you to secure the building. How many bad people are in there? I have no idea. How big's the building? I have no idea. What's the layout of the building? I have no idea. That's entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Right?
I like it.
So we do deal with it. And what we do is I never have an interview without where we don't have somebody, entrepreneur, come to campus. And my standard question is, tell us your best failure story. And you do learn from them. So I'm a professor. Every moment teaches you something about how to run a business. It either teaches you what to do or it teaches you what not to do. And some of those moments are super painful, and some of the failures they could kill the business.
So would you say a business plan is a roadmap to your first pivot point, we'll call it, and then your first pivot point is your first stepping stone to your ultimate success?
Yes, and I would put the emphasis on the ING is engage in the business planning process and you write the document. But the document is, I'm not saying the document's worthless. But for example, in the old days, before we did everything on computer, I would have told you to print your business plan and put it in a 3-ring binder, because that, if you did it, you could open up and pull out a page and reinsert it. So that you treat your business plan like a living, breathing document. It's your best thinking at the moment, but it's the planning process that's the key. And that's what allows you to navigate these little failures. Right now, this is a weird connection, but I'm actually reading, can't believe it's the first time I've read this book, but Undaunted Courage by Stephen Ambrose, about the Lewis and Clark, expedition. And another classic example of these little failures. I'm just at the part now where they're on their way back, and they've decided that they're going to try to cross the Bitterroot Mountains, and it's June, and the snow is 4 feet deep, and they have to turn around. And they have to turn around. They have to go back. They've got 60 horses they've got with them. They've got 25 men. They've got dogs. They've run out of food, basically. And they're dejected because they are now backtracking along the trail. Well, I'm sorry. Again, I see hundreds of entrepreneurship stories that I've heard over the years of people going through exactly that phase. I launched a new branch of my business. I've tried a new product. I tried serving a new customer base. I spent a lot of money. I spent a lot of time. Now I have to retreat and come back out of the woods because it turns out that path was not, I couldn't get it. I couldn't get that path to work for me.
Yeah. And at first that might feel like failure because you're backtracking. But, when you look back a year from now, 2 years from now, you'll see that on that trail you took backwards was all the lessons you needed to progress on that original path. And
the reason I like this analogy, thanks for letting me play on this analogy, because it's beautiful, because I haven't finished the chapter yet, but the Nez Perce chiefs were kept telling Lewis and Clark, don't go. You cannot make it through. They're like, but it's June. It's June 16th. How can there be so much snow in the mountains? It's June. And so it got to the point where they started ignoring the advice from the chiefs, and they set off. And guess what? The information they were hearing the whole time was correct. I see entrepreneurs make this mistake all the time. They convince themselves the market, the world needs my solution. They need my business to work. But yet all of this information is coming to you saying, no, you're not ready. This isn't right. You've got the information. The information you have is wrong and flawed. So I'm waiting for the chapter to end where, Meriwether Lewis is writing in his journal like, geez, I should have listened to that advice.
Yeah. I mean,
that's entrepreneurship in a nutshell. I hear that's
the name of the book.
Undaunted Courage.
Okay.
This is the way he and I roll. Is I'm going to mention the book. He'll have it read by the next Switchbacks game. So, but it's again, all we do as entrepreneurship professors is this is why seeing entrepreneurship as a process is key to us, because it's all about navigating those large and small failures and how you pivot around them.
Yeah, kind of in your story, it reminded me of a concept in psychology called confirmation bias. And I'd imagine that's very salient within entrepreneurship as well, and could be something that probably hurts you.
So 1/3 of the research in my field as an academic is psychology based. It's not what I personally do. I actually use geography lenses in mine. So I study why cities have more entrepreneurship than others. But confirmation bias and something, an academic term called heuristic, which is a little mental model. So like if you hear somebody say like, when in doubt, punt, there's probably some military equivalent, some expression used that if this, then that sort of algorithm. That's a heuristic that we use. You see the world as a chess game. You're thinking of chess when others see it as poker.
Or checkers.
So these are a huge chunk of what we do is training entrepreneurs to try to avoid that confirmation bias, that availability bias. The information you have, like this book I just mentioned, that's availability bias because it's available to me because I'm reading the book right now. So it's fresh in my mind. So I'm going to talk about it and had to come up.
Yeah.
Any psychologist listening going, that's availability bias, right? So we do spend a lot of time training. And one of the things we are doing is there's in my world, a famous study that came out of Italy where they were teaching their entrepreneurs scientific method. So with no alterations for the fact that these are business people or entrepreneurs, they were taught how to have a research question, phrase the question, do some research, phrase a hypothesis, collect data that either validates or refutes that idea, and analyze, and then start the process again. So, for example, I think my market is this group of people. Could be a hypothesis. And you go out and collect data and you validate that, and you can and then you analyze the data and say, is my data supporting that statement or is it refuting it? And what you're doing is you're giving permission for entrepreneurs to ask the key question that we academics are given permission to ask, which is, I don't know. So it's a very uncomfortable position for most people to say, I don't know. But if you actually approach entrepreneurship from do you think the market will support 1995 for our product? I don't know. But what can we do to validate or disprove that statement is kind of how you move forward. Yeah. That's how you deal with the failure process, I think. Yeah, anyway, don't get me started. I'm already taking too long on this, but this is a really key part. And again, I think this is where the Lego blocks of being a veteran, because I think so much of the training, and it depends, we could also talk a little bit about the branch. I do believe that which branch of military you've served in actually affects your view of this.
Really? Let's talk about that. So, I'm curious. Because we're both Army. I'm not an entrepreneur, but I'd be curious to hear about the different branches and their perspective on entrepreneurship.
Okay, so this is just from my experience, and I would love to do a study on this. And if anybody who watches this podcast has an opinion about this, I'd love to hear it. In the Army and in any of the branches of service where it's boots on the ground with trigger pullers, the size of your units, you could be fighting in groups as small as 2, 1, 4. All right. United States Navy, they deploy, and you think of somebody in a room moving a pin on a map, they're moving thousands of people in one move. So if you're serving on a ship, you're serving on especially an aircraft carrier, the ultimate example, that's 7,000 people or however that now are on the Gerald Ford size aircraft carrier. So they're never alone. They're not going to be doing things. They do everything as a team. Not to say that the Army doesn't. And of course, I'm not a veteran, so I'm speaking from my own observations. So I could be wrong about my observations about this. But one of the things that infantry people in particular have to realize is there's a very good chance in the way the training works is I need to know my job, but also I need to know the job of the person above me because they may be gone this afternoon. They may go down as a casualty. So I have to know my job, and I think the Army infantry, let me use that word. The infantry approach to being an entrepreneur is the jack of all trades, and I'm going to do it all at once, and I'm going to do it at the same time. So I'm going to work with customers. I'm going to sweep the floor. I'm going to, but whereas the Navy or the Air Force, again, the Air Force is operating in huge teams of people in order to fulfill their missions. Yeah. And they sort of bring a different team mindset, and you'll see it in the way they found their teams. You'll see it in who they pick as a teammate, as a co-founder, or how they hire their first set of employees. And if you think about it, I don't have the data off the top of my hands, but I know that the Air Force and Navy are often criticizing for having a heavy dose of flag officers. They got a lot of admirals and generals, right? But if you think about the way they fight as a group, that makes sense. Whereas say the Marine Corps is probably heavier on NCOs because that's the primary unit at which they're fighting at, right? So I think you see that play out in how people approach being an entrepreneur. Yeah. So in some cases, you have to tell people you don't need such a big team. And in some cases is stop trying to do it all by yourself. And so I do find a correlation between the advice I'm often giving and the branch of service that they've come from.
Yeah, I see that. I'd love to share my experience, then I want to hear yours too, Blake. But my experience in the military comes from a special forces background, which is a team of 12. Each team has 2 of each MOS or job, specific job trait. I was a medic, so there was one other medic on the team. We had an engineer who dealt with building, design, organization, accountability, and of course, explosives. We had a communications guy, so all things radio. We had a weapons specialist, and then we had a few like higher ranking, more leadership type roles. But a 12-man team with very highly trained and very specific skill sets kind of came together to work synergistically to meet a bigger purpose. But and I'll tell you from experience, when we would be put with 1 or 2 other teams, we would butt heads. A lot of ego there. We're the better team. We don't need you guys kind of situations would happen. And then in the Navy, like you're saying, you have 7,000 people on a ship. Not one of those people were probably as highly trained as a Green Beret, but each one of them was necessary to the greater mission of that destroyer. So you have, your trash maintenance guy, you have your cooks, you have your cleaners, you have the person who's, checking all the gears within the engine room. And even that's probably broken down into sub jobs. So someone who may come from a destroyer background would think they need a huge team where everyone just does a little bit. Whereas someone from my background might want a small team with very highly trained individuals.
Because you were maneuverable.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that was very satisfying for me. And I'm not an entrepreneur, but if I were to get into it, I would want 2 or 3 business partners with each person kind of holding a large piece of that pie.
And to tie it to what we were talking about before, is what we're talking about is what branch of service has shaped your heuristic. How do you see the world?
Yeah.
How are you perceiving? Are you a squad of 12
right.
or are you an aircraft carrier of 7,000?
What are you, Blake?
No, it's interesting. And I think it definitely is going to be unique on the combat arms side, right? Mm-hmm. Because, I started out in first assignment was, 3rd ACR, combat squadron, deployed with them. And, and then followed on, I was at, couple different, just hospital assignments and recruiting and stuff that's way different. But, from a training standpoint or combat standpoint, I think, you get out and you're maneuvering and you have, I think, way more variables than, somebody on a ship or a pilot. My dad, flew Jolly Green rescue helicopters around the jungle in Vietnam. He had a whole lot of things facing him, but it was, I don't think he would have the freedom of choice that your average soldier does on the ground, for better or worse. I mean, he had a much more complex machine, different things to go down and do, but there was a lot more controlled environment. Doesn't sound right either, but
kind of, yeah.
But if you're on the ground, you don't know what's over the next hill. You don't know what you're going to deal with. You may have to take over for your buddy if he's down and carry on. So, it's just different.
It sounds like you were part of some bigger organizations. So do you think that's translated to CCS? Is it kind of a big company with a lot of employees, or do you have a lot of very specially trained individuals?
Be careful. This could be confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Sorry, academic joke.
That's true.
No, we have a wide variety of tech. So, I was ran an aid station, was a headquarters troop XO. So what's that? 150 people at Fort Bliss, but then went to Madigan Army Medical Center, which is a few thousand employees, which was, a different kind of beast. But I was a company commander there. So, I was there managing a bunch of doctors and nurses and stuff. So it's all, and I never got the experience of being like in a division or, it never got like fourth ID kind of exposure, probably kind of like the special forces side of the world. And so that's a unique world too.
Yeah. Okay.
But I don't know. It is, I think having served in the Army and where I did in that first assignment really helped me deal with the variables that might come at me. The other thing, it helped me just deal with people in general and be able to go and present and talk to people. First assignment there was a aid station, combat aid station platoon leader. So I had to go brief squadron commander and all these other people that, as a young 22-year-old, who gets that experience to go and talk to lieutenant colonels and, maybe get corrected a few times and have to learn how to stand up and take shots and stuff.
You guys were talking a little bit before we started about how entrepreneurship has evolved. You said back in your day, that wasn't even a word you really used. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Well, not that old.
I was quoting.
Stop being so offended. Come on. You got socks older than he is. Come on.
I'm 33.
Yeah, he's got socks older than you. I'm just telling you.
Yeah.
I was listening to Small Giants, I think is what the book is.
Okay.
And I think that's the book where they were talking about kind of, do you have to explode into this giant business to be super successful, right? Do you need to be a $50 million, $200 million business? Is that what success is? Or can you be a lifestyle business? Can you be a $5 million, $10 million business and keep the core of your business? But one of the things that mentioned was back in the 50s and 60s, being an entrepreneur was unheard of. It was a bad word. Corporate America was what was good. So
why was it a bad word?
It was just a cultural thing. So you'd have to, my father leaves the United States Air Force. He goes to work with General Electric. He gets sent to a GE college in Syracuse, New York for 2 weeks. And he is fully expecting that he's going to spend the rest of his life working for General Electric, right? And then, so when I told him that I was going to be leaving an employee job and start my first company, it was hard for him to fathom that was something that could be done. Whereas my father-in-law, who was a serial entrepreneur, his attitude was, "What's taking you so long?" Like completely different attitudes. But I think what Blake is talking about is that there was a culture that you were raised, you went to university, you got a degree, and you were going to go work in a gray flannel suit for the rest of your life at one company. I've got students now who can't fathom staying 5 years with the same company. That's just, it's a completely different, and I'm not arguing one's better than the other. It's just that it is a completely different mindset. And you've got people that will drift in and out of entrepreneurship. They might even do some side hustles. They might work for themselves for a little while and then go get a job. And then they might start another company, work for themselves. That's another thing that's changed is that in my career as an entrepreneurship educator, you had people who said, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And what they meant was, I'm expecting to do that for 30 years. And now you people are very comfortable sort of oscillating between working for themselves and then working for someone else. In fact, I would argue that one of the most common things I'm hearing from my students is a lot of companies are now asking as part of their interview process, have you ever done anything entrepreneurial? Because they're realizing bringing somebody in with an entrepreneurial mindset it's another way of saying I'm bringing somebody with some ambition that wants to sort of grow stuff and look for opportunities to build the business. I will say that academically, though, that history is when he left the military, he couldn't even gone to a business school and gotten a degree in entrepreneurship. It didn't exist. So it wasn't really until the 1990s when students, like even at CU Boulder, which is where my PhD's from, it was the students demanding, we want courses in entrepreneurship because we're part of the .com explosion where, if you remember, well, he doesn't, but pets.com, for example, the .com bubble, everybody was raising and starting their online.
I was supposed to retire during that. So
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So you've got all this stuff. Entrepreneurship, there were no faculty of entrepreneurship. There were no PhD programs in entrepreneurship. There was no undergraduate degrees. It was the students demanding it. And suddenly schools, deans, colleges of business were like, well, we better give the customers what they want. And that's how you now have, I would argue that really the field of entrepreneurship as an academic discipline within business schools has only been around since I would say the mid-1990s and really got its full voice as a legitimate field in 2000 with this paper that I was mentioning. This is the Shane and Venkataraman paper, which in my world is famous. It is the seminal paper for putting the flag in to say, this is what we mean when we talk about entrepreneurship as academics in a business school. Now, we've got entrepreneurship in multiple colleges. You've got entrepreneurship programs in the College of Nursing. You've got entrepreneurship in the College of Business. I'm thinking like the CU Music School has a 3-course sequence on entrepreneurship, music entrepreneurship. It's now being pushed into the far corners into departments that most, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, would be like, what does entrepreneurship have to do with nursing?
Well, do you think entrepreneurships hold kind of a responsibility to innovate in these sectors? And that's why?
It's part of it, but it's also partly reflecting on the fact, let's use the music school example.
Mm-hmm.
So you had a phenomenal music school like the CU School of Music creating some of the best musicians in the world. But how are they going to make a living? Most of them are going to be freelancers.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't actually know how to run them. So they knew their instrument backwards and forwards, but they didn't know how to run themselves and their career as a business. And again, that was an example in which the students came forward. And I happened to be a doctoral student shortly after how this program was created, but they came to Frank Moyes, who is a gentleman who most of us who are CU Boulder graduates in entrepreneurship, we learned to teach from him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the one that put the entrepreneurship education, and he went over to the School of Music and helped them design their program.
Mm.
So I think that's what you're seeing is the side hustle, the I'm going to do something, I'm going to be a freelancer, I'm going to work for myself. That's where the need for this entrepreneurship training and what a few years ago would have been seen as pretty obscure fields makes a lot more sense now. You're like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. You got a lot of people who are, I have a niece who's a doctor of physical therapy. And if you think about it, what she does is freelances. She's a PRN. If you know what PRN, you're going to get this script. It means as needed.
Yep.
So she's popping in and out of hospitals and places that on an as needed basis.
Mm-hmm.
And she's billing as an independent company.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Huh.
So,
yeah, I like what you were saying earlier about the innovation aspect of entrepreneurship. That's why kind of why I wanted to lead it in that direction, because in a way, like there's a creative aspect to entrepreneurship. Like you said, they're exploiting opportunities. It's not exploiting in a negative way.
I prefer the word pursue.
I like pursue or leverage. They're leveraging opportunities to innovate in a sector.
Yep.
So as a non-entrepreneur with no education in it, I do think entrepreneurs kind of hold that responsibility.
And what we talk about is there's always some level of novelty in the entrepreneurial startup. Even if you started the 101st Mexican restaurant in Colorado Springs, if you're successful, that's because you found some niche. There's something novel, the new twist. One of the veterans that was in the Entrepreneurship Bootcamp for Veterans program here in August is from Colorado Springs, Flo DeCastro. Some of your listeners will absolutely know who he is. Mm-hmm. What was the business he's bringing? He wants to do Filipino burritos, right? So is it a burrito? Yeah, but by the way, they're delicious. He had some samples for us.
Nice.
So the idea is that if his business is successful, it's because he's found that niche. There's always some novelty. So be careful. I want to make very clear if anyone's listening to this and they're thinking about being an entrepreneur, is the biggest mistake novice entrepreneurs make is they think they have to come up with an idea that no one's ever had before. That is not true. You have to find an unmet need in the market. This is to his point about your business needs to be profitable. So you find something that people want, but most of the time you then have to find some unique twist that you put on it that will allow people to buy your product and not somebody else that's on the market currently. So I have people who will come to me and young, we're talking about very young first year or second year university students, and they'll come to me and say, well, I had an idea for a business, but I did a Google search and I've already found 15 companies doing what I want to do, so therefore I won't do it. And you're like, no, you're misinterpreting the data. In the early days of thinking about your business, you interpret that information as a good thing. It means someone else out there thinks this is an idea worth pursuing and putting money into. Don't flatter yourself. None of us are smart enough to come up with an idea no one else has ever had before.
Right. You have to find something that people want, but at a niche that they don't know they want.
We have a student who's in our garage right now. He'll be a sophomore. He's just started his sophomore year. He runs a lawn care business here in town. So that makes him what, 19, 20? He's going to gross $100,000 this year with his lawn care business. I'm sorry, that's But what he's finding is the unique twist is that he's trying to, what he says, if you hear him talk about it, I want to professionalize the industry. What he means by that is he's spending money to train every one of his employees, who are, by the way, a lot of his high school friends are still in high school.
There you go.
He's training them on turf science, like analyzing the pH balance of your soil, because he'll tell you, like, we're trying to grow grass in one of the worst places to try to grow grass in the world. Yeah. It just doesn't want to grow here. Mm-hmm. So he has to. So he's actually spending money to send these people to get certifications in turf management to learn how to grow grass in a climate like this. And I have a feeling that attitude, even if his clients aren't aware of it, I think that attitude is coming across.
Absolutely.
Because he's clearly coming. I'm a professional lawn care. I'm not just a kid with a mower.
Mount Carmel Veteran Service Center and the Veterans Voice podcast are partnered with Colorado Computer Support IT Pros to handle all of our computing and technology needs. They are veteran-owned, and they're your team for innovative, collaborative IT services and solutions to enhance and support your Colorado business. Here on the show, we talk a lot about business and entrepreneurship. As businesses grow, it's inevitable that you need to outsource IT services. When that time comes for your business, consider Colorado Computer Support IT Pros. Like I said at the beginning, we all learn through each other's lived experiences. So I want to ask a little bit of a personal question. If you could go back a decade, or you were able to go back a decade and look at yourself now, what aspects of you would you admire, and what aspects of you would you kind of be ashamed of in your entrepreneurial journey?
Ooh, that's a good question.
So I think admiring the ability, the willingness to step up and keep showing up, right? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the other things is we were talking about, I think a couple weeks ago at his thing is, I've still been married 36 years now this week. So
that's admirable.
That's whatever we've done, we figured out how to make it through it, through the military and then through entrepreneurship. What we shouldn't have done is, so we had and this is a good lesson for entrepreneurs, is be careful, it's like investing, be careful of your client balance and what you're selling. And we had one client that was 60% of our business. And so all of our energy went into keeping them happy, which seems to make sense in some, but we should have been spending a lot of time on the rest of the business, because no client stays with you forever. And so we basically, the rest of the business kind of stagnated, and then that client left us. And, if you have to lay off half your staff, that's a hard lesson to learn. And, it happens, but it was a brutal failure. So I think that is better assessing what we should be doing with, bending over backwards for, clients and ignoring the rest of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's only a failure if you aren't able to sit here and learn from it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course. But
it's a learning opportunity. Yeah. How about that?
It's a pivot point.
Yeah. It's the word of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I would say that I think the one thing, so I'm thinking about one company that we started in particular, was the very first one. We were envisioning a consulting business where we were going to help scientists and engineers create their own businesses. So I was working in the aerospace industry, and I had a group of companies that I got to know. They were all doing space weather forecasting. And this is where you can actually anticipate 2 or 3 days in advance. It's probably now standard technology, when the sun's going to burp out all kinds of, stuff. And you'd come to find out there's a whole bunch of commercial applications for that data. So the airlines need to stay in radio contact over the North Pole, even if they're not on radar. And if there's a massive solar storm, you have to reroute your flight because you're not going to be in radio contact, So we were thinking that the airlines, but I think it was a classic example of me trying to pretend that I knew about entrepreneurship, and the idea that somebody would hire me to help them build their business, I think was, in hindsight, that was pretty much folly. I didn't have to actually go through the process of the failure, because I was working with companies that were trying to raise money. And as soon as 9/11 happened, There used to be a diner in Boulder, which is where all the VCs, all the money people would hang out. You could go in at 6, and it was all self-organized. You could go in at 6 o'clock in the morning or whatever, 7. It's called Turley's, and walk in, and you would say like, I do tech, I do beer, I do sustainability or whatever, and then there'd be a hand. One of the investors in the back of the room put their hand up and say, "Yeah, that's what I do," and you'd go down and pitch. They all it's like they left the planet on September 12th. It's like they all packed up in the alien spacecraft and left the planet because they were gone. Mm-hmm. And that just brought all the entrepreneurship, at least in Colorado here, to a screeching halt. So that's when I was like, I got to do something. So I started teaching, and that's how I ended up pursuing the PhD. My wife's the one that told me, she's like, I said, maybe I'll get an MBA. She's like, you're not MBA material. I would say the one thing that I've always been good at, though, and I really wish I could instill this in some of my younger students, is physically walking in to say hello to people and cold calling people and just saying, I think the idea of, I see it in my son who's 20, for example, is the idea of using the phone to pick up the phone and call somebody I've never spoken to before in my life, or leave a voicemail and say, hey, I'm reading what you're doing on the internet. I think it's really interesting. Could we just get a cup of coffee? And that is just something, as you can tell, I'm not an introvert. And I think that's always been sort of one of my major strengths. And I think that's a key thing. Not that every entrepreneur has to be good at it, but if it's something that you have struggled with, and you bring in somebody on your team who is not an introvert, who's somebody who's extroverted, who's like, talked to 1,000 people this week, I'm your guy.
Yeah. Well, this has been some great conversation. I want to close up with some advice to a young entrepreneur. So think back to a time when you guys were in the grind of it, struggling, didn't know if you were going to make it to the next day of your current pursuit. What got you through that time? And how would you kind of reframe it to give advice to a young entrepreneur?
Most bad times don't last forever. You'll work through it, and the sun will come up. There's been a lot of people before you that have been through really hard times. And even if it's super tough, at some point you will work through it. And even if your business idea wasn't the right idea, even if your business shuts down, because unfortunately, I don't know, what's the number? The number's huge of businesses that end up shutting down. There is always something later on. Maybe it is go get a job. Maybe it is go work for someone else, take a reset, come back and try it again in 5 years. Maybe you realize entrepreneurship wasn't for you. It's not for everybody. It's not for, Larry says you can train everybody, but there's a lot of stressors involved. You've got to be able to mentally deal with it. And these are good beer conversations. But
you need to do this over a beer.
Yeah. There's always another opportunity to try. Pick yourself back up and go try the next thing.
He's right about one thing, which is I do believe that you can train everybody, but it's a little bit like me saying I can train anyone to play football. I can teach you the game. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good at it. You do need to come through the door with some basic skills. Like I coach Little League football. If you come through the door and you've got some size and some speed and you're a little angry at the world, I can definitely teach you the game, right? So he's right about that piece of it. So, but I'm emphasizing that there's a process we can teach, and some people are good at learning and adapting and creating their own version of the process that works for them. So
yeah, you can teach them the game, but you can't teach them to excel. Yeah, I like that.
I would say that my biggest piece of advice, and this is specifically for people who are in the early nascent, they're not at his stage of business. They're going to create a business. They think they want to start a business. What you have to realize is that you have identified a problem in the market that you need to fix. Don't focus on your solution. So when I train my students, they'll come in and say, tell me about your business. Well, it's an app. No, your business is not the app. What's the problem you're trying to fix with your app? And realize that once you understand the problem, everything else can change. It's the problem. My customers need a way to fill in the blank. My customers are hungry for it, fill in the blank. What is it that they need fixed? And don't get hung up on the solution. So this is where you have people who are committing themselves to, and we see this a lot with young students, it has to be an app. And get students who don't understand why they didn't do well in the class because they're trying to pitch an app for elderly people to use to remember to take their medicine. And you have to explain to them, my mother doesn't use, she has an iPad, but she's not going to use an app to keep, to monitor her medicine. It's just, so once you figure out what the problem in the market is, then be flexible about everything else. Be willing to let go of it. Maybe it's not an app. Maybe it's a phone service so that the phone rings with an automated voice that says, Mrs. Plummer, you should take your medicine now.
We should create an app that helps elderly people understand their phone first. And then,
but then isn't that ironic because they don't understand their phone, so they're not going to understand the apps,
what's
right?
the point of an app?
So we see this time and time again as people get I have an image that I have on a slide I've been using for years is when you focus on your solution, you've picked up a hammer and you're like, I got to go find nails. When what you need to be doing is thinking about, okay, what is a snag in the world? What is a market problem? And how can I fix and address that? And is that market problem something I really care about?
Yeah, if I could shed some insight here at the end, I liked what you said earlier about how much of the physical was actually mental. And I've been kind of stirring on that in the background. And I have a story to share. I think in any pursuit, it's important to differentiate the mental and the physical. Probably in entrepreneurship, I think there's probably a difference. Part of Special Forces selection, the last part of Special Forces selection is an unknown distance, unknown time ruck. Ruck march, meaning you put weight on your back and just walk until you're done. So it's kind of the biggest dread of the entire 21 days because it's on day 21. You start at 2 a.m. and you hear rumors, it's 30 miles, it's 40 miles, it's whatever. You don't know anything. And so, in psychology, the mind doesn't like unknown. So we create these made up things that make us feel better. So we all tell ourselves it's 35 miles. So we'll just go with that. So we have about 80, 85 pounds on our back going through the woods, the pines, the sand of North Carolina. And we just walked. We left at 2 a.m. We could all see our breath. It was freezing cold and we didn't know how long we were going to be walking. And at the beginning, we're kind of all bunched up. There's about 80 of us at this point. And over the hours, we just kind of spread out until you're alone. And you're just following these cones, which are every couple 100 meters, depending on if there's turns or anything. But you don't know how far you're going. All you know is that your back hurts because of how heavy the ruck is. Your feet hurt because of the sand that's been getting in between your bootlaces. Now it's in your socks. You're out of water. You have minimal food. It's hot because the sun's out now. And at hour 7, 8, you've probably walked 30 miles and you still don't know when you're going to be done. And so a fun thing they would like to do is we had, the buildings on Camp McCall there, and it would kind of like cloverleaf around it. So you would come back close to where you started and you think you're about to be done. And then you would go back out 10 more miles, come back. And, in that moment, I was 25 at the time. This was a huge pivot point in my life. I realized that the physical pain and the mental pain were drastically different in the amount you could handle because I pushed myself 100% mentally to that finish line while my body was physically deteriorating with blisters on my feet, depleted of water, probably mild heat stroke, sunburn on my head. You understand that? And, I understood for the first time what it was like to mentally push through something where I physically couldn't imagine going any further. So I'd imagine in the entrepreneur space, you have physical issues like money dilemmas, employees you have to fire, and all these physical things, these tangible things that are, act as a speed bump. But mentally, you have to remember you can go a lot further than you can physically. So do you guys kind of relate to that?
To me, that's a perfect analogy of exactly what I mean about the mindset.
Yeah.
You have to so we tell the students, get out of the building and keep moving.
Keep moving.
Get out of the building and keep moving. So you just got to keep plugging along until you've, and at some point, some piece of information will come to you that it's time to hang it up, or there's a piece of information that says you're almost there.
Yeah. I like that.
No, that's a great point because there's times that you physically don't want to do it and you keep showing up. And it's not to that extreme, but it's very similar. you've got scars, you've got pain, you've been beat on, and you can mentally show up the next day and carry on.
Yeah. Well said.
I do have one other thing. I was thinking about, what story do I tell today? No. So
story time.
One of the things that we talked about at his entrepreneurial boot camp for veterans, because I'm like, yeah, I'll help you out. I'll interview some people. And he's like, well, can you come talk? So
and he's like, what am I going to talk about?
and can you sit down and do some mentorship? I'm like, sure. And then they selected me to talk at graduation. And one of the things that came up was imposter syndrome. You have no idea what you're doing. You show up, you're not an entrepreneur, you're a combat veteran, you're a cook, you're a truck driver, you're a personnel clerk, you're a space guy, whatever, but you have no idea what it is to be an entrepreneur. And, but when you go in and you do your business plan, you come up with it, you are the expert at what that little narrow niche is that you have, and then you find experts to augment you. And it was funny because he's like, yeah, talk about imposter syndrome. So I get up there and he put me in a position to be an imposter. I'm up there speaking, and
wasn't on purpose.
There's a guy that had came from DC, super professional, worked for this, was the chief of staff for the Secretary of the Navy. There was a lady there, 29-year Air Force veteran. She ran the Space Foundation for 10 years, and now she travels the globe talking and speaking about space. And there was another lady retired. She's retiring senior NCO out of the Navy that ran around with the SecDef and the Secretary of the Navy doing protocol and writing speeches for them. And I'm just like, why am I up here? And it was funny, but none of them have run a business for 25 years. They've been working in a very constrained environment, doing it, and I've got 25 years of experience doing that. I don't have a ton of experience running around writing speeches for flag officers, none. But I have hung out with flag officers. I don't know, much about space, but I don't have to compete with them. I can help them learn to run their businesses. That's where I'm an expert at. And I think that saying is get the entrepreneur system, work through the imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Imposter syndrome.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen a lot.
We all have it.
And you just have to work through it and realize that in your little area there that you're working in, or large area, you are really good at that. And you're better than most people at doing that area that you picked.
Yeah. I think imposter syndrome is something I could dedicate a whole 2-hour podcast to. So maybe
have us back.
Yeah, we'll do another one.
I'm not kidding. That was a huge theme. It did not emerge organically. It's typically a very common thing when I don't care what program we're running, is whether it's veterans or tech entrepreneurs or student entrepreneurs, the voice in the back of your head of, you are so arrogant to think you could possibly start a business. It's just that there's a voice in your back of your head that says, where's this hubris coming from? Are you crazy? You can't do this. And why would you do this alone? And so that is just a recurring theme for entrepreneurs. It's lonely, and, but we academics have it. One of my very, very close friends, we were baby doctoral students in the day. He was getting his PhD paid by the Air Force. And I told him I'm taking over running this institute. And he's like, yeah. And I said, when you and I first knew each other, we were still doctoral students. We were baby doctoral students back in the day. I said, now we're in charge of stuff. He goes, yeah, and I'm getting my star. He's like, if only they knew.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't feel like I'm actually worthy of not worthy. It's not the right word. It's a surprise. Like suddenly they're like pinning stars. You've got a flag. And, I'm now running an institute. And you're like, really? But I'm still the same dork I was. What's so different?
Yeah.
And then there are moments where you're meeting entrepreneurs and you're talking to them and you're like, actually, I just need to relax. There's the information sort of comes to the front of my mind, and I start offering advice, and I'm going, okay, it's coming out because I am that expert in this one space, and I'm happy to share that expertise and putting people at ease in terms of like, you're not alone.
Yeah,
you're absolutely not alone when it comes to this.
Yeah, everyone feels imposter syndrome. I'll do this on my own time, but I would love to get into the psychology behind imposter syndrome. Like, where does it come from? Why is it worse in some people than others?
One of our vets in the program actually does imposter syndrome counseling. I'd be happy to introduce you to him. Actually, he'd be a good person to have on the if you can do remote podcast. He'd be a really good choice.
Let's do that.
Can I tell my story?
What story?
So he told me that you might ask about.
We used to do funny stories at the end of every show.
It's not so funny.
Yeah,
but
it could be any story.
I like using this story as a way to highlight the gulf between being a civilian and being a veteran. So, as you know, I've been teaching for veterans since 2008. I've been around veterans a long time. I've always wondered how I would have done in the military if I'd ever joined. I don't know. I'm never going to find out. It's too late for that.
Yeah.
But in 2013, I was in the Moore, Oklahoma movie theater that was hit by the F5 tornado. So if you remember that story, there was unfortunately hit the school. Some young kids were killed, and the movie theater it went right over the movie theater, and my ears popped. When the tornado actually is over your head, the pressure drops so bad it feels like you've dropped out of an airplane. Boom, and the top floor of the hospital is gone. The bowling alley is flattened. The Harley Davidson shop's been destroyed. There's and I remember thinking in that moment, because I was like, oh, I wonder if this is what it's like being in the military, like infantry. Like there's something outside that's trying to kill me. I wonder if this is what it feels like. And I went to the next DBV that summer, and I said what I just said to you to somebody who'd been in combat. They're like, no, not even close. I said, why? And he said, because in that moment, that's when you're supposed to get up and do your job. There's something outside that's trying to kill you. Now that's when your training kicks in, and now you are responding. You're not. He said, what were you doing? I said, I was cuddling next to the man next to me. I could literally feel his beard. Like we were all cuddled like this along the wall of the movie theater. Mm-hmm. And that's when I realized there's just no way I could spend the rest of my career teaching only veterans, and I will never fully understand what it's like, that service to country and I've never had a moment except that where I've been in harm's way. And that was that one moment, those two experiences together, and having that veteran say that to me, I was like, wow, that's just, it generates a lot of respect. I don't care if it was supplying the gasoline to the people on the front line or whatever your job is in the military. I don't care your job. There was always a chance you could have been deployed to a place where you were in harm's way. And I've never had a feeling like that in my job. What's for me a harm's way? Like a student in the front row is mad at me and throws something at me. I mean, it's,
To be fair, in a tornado, I think that was your job, was to
just kind of cuddle.
I don't think there's anything to do.
Like everybody line up and please assume the fetal position on the floor. That's exactly what we did.
The thing about the military is you kind of, what you're getting into too. You're prepared for it. You're trained for it. So
I promise this will be the last thing, because I know you're probably not going to, a lot of this won't make it.
We could keep going.
One of the things that I get asked a lot, which is why I'm so committed to serving veterans. Why am I so committed to this community? And it's not because of God and country. It's not because of my political views. It's because I've had so many friends deploy. My friends were the ones that served in the first Gulf War. And they were telling me stories of they were getting injections of chemicals that the contents were classified. They weren't allowed to know. They were coming home with sicknesses. And I'm not saying that I'm criticizing the military. That's not my point. My point is that the serving in uniform, the country asks so much of our people in uniform. I'm one of those civilians. I know why people lace their dog tags into their boots. I know why. Like when you explain that to people who are civilians for the first time, they're shocked, right? Like, again, another indication of my day is very different from yours, right? Mm-hmm. But what amazes me, to your point, is I know so many veterans that knew that going in, that they knew they were going to be asked to make these commitments. They knew the government and the military was going to ask them for this level of commitment, and they still signed up. And that makes me feel, I'm almost just emotional about it. I'm overwhelmed by the commitment that so many veterans have taken, even knowing that was the situation they were putting themselves in. Mm-hmm. And it just makes me feel, so when I take everyone's service to me and my family personally, I feel like you have served me and my family. And that's the reason I get up every morning saying, okay, what's the next thing we can be doing for vets?
Well, thank you for helping them.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
And it was funny. I mean, I remember before going over to Saudi Arabia in 90, is just lining up and just jab, jab, jab. And you're like, what's that?
You had
like,
hair before that.
Yeah, I had hair. But yeah, we didn't know. I mean, it's going to protect you from gas. Okay, great. So
to your point, though, training in the military to recreate that tornado experience, the war experience where you have to get up and now do your job is probably our biggest sticking point. There's no way to really recreate that stress, that anxiety, that pressure that you feel when you're in that moment. You need to do your job. The medic that needs to treat the guy who's bleeding out, the sniper who needs to take the shot, the bomb squad guy who needs to go up to that IED. Like there's no way to really emulate that until you're in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the direction. If anyone's still listening 2 hours into this, I commend you. But the direction, the direction that this podcast is heading as I start my degree program at UCCS, I really want to bring that lived experience of stress and anxiety into an academic world and sit down with people like you guys and try and merge the two, because I do, and my veteran brothers and sisters have that lived experience. And in that tornado, we've had to pick up our aid bag or our gun and performed for sometimes hours or days on end. So I just really think there's two sides to everything. There's, what do they say in college? It's like you have the ivory tower and then the school of hard knocks. Like we need to merge the two instead of kind of dividing the two.
Yeah, they merge in the business school and in an entrepreneurship program. I guarantee that.
Yeah, so I like it. Well, I hope to, chat again with you guys both. This was some great conversation.
Yeah.
And drive safe out there. I think it's pouring rain now, so
is it?
All the windows are blacked out in here, but yeah.
Yeah.
Appreciate you guys.
Great podcast. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah.